Hi, my name is Colin, and today we're going to be talking about The Legend of Zelda. Specifically, I'll be walking you through my process of how I tried to figure out which would be the best game in the series for a complete newcomer to play first. I'd love to hear your opinions and reasoning in the comments below, or even just let me know what the first Zelda game you played was. Anyway, let's set the scene. Pretend that out of all the people you know, you are the closest thing there is to a Zelda expert. You've played all the games, the mainline ones anyways, and you've got a pretty good grasp on where each game's strengths and weaknesses lie. Then all of a sudden, your mom calls you up. Maybe it's your little brother or your partner. They want to get into this Zelda thing that they've heard so much about, and they're wondering what game you think they should start with. Your jaw drops. Your mouth flaps open and shut a couple of times while you search to find the right words. This is everything you've been waiting for. The chance to lay out all your Zelda knowledge and convert this person into a fan. But how do you approach it? Do you start them on the original so they can play through the series as it develops? Or do you start them on Skyward Sword so they can play all the games in timeline order? You are now an ambassador for the series as a whole, and you better not mess it up. Now that you find yourself in this situation, we need to find some context for this recommendation, which means that it's time to make a few assumptions. First, let's assume that our prospective player is a casual gamer. They've dabbled enough that controls shouldn't be an issue, but they're not necessarily playing intense games on the daily. This is to say they shouldn't have trouble playing the game, but they're less likely to be interested in high difficulty or obscure puzzles right away. Second, I think we have to assume no prior knowledge of the Zelda games and their mechanics. It might seem like common knowledge to you that in Wind Waker HD on the Wii U, you need to enter the auction house at night after completing Dragon Roost Cavern with at least 300 rupees to be sure that you can win the auction for the Swift Sale. Oh, and it might not show up, so be sure to enter and exit a couple times until it's available to buy. But it's fair to say your mom probably doesn't know that. As an extension of this assumption, it should be fair to say that no outside knowledge is being employed in the playing of the game. They won't be looking at the wiki, and they won't be phoning you up halfway through to ask you where to find all the heart pieces they missed. Third, we need to assume that we have ready access to all games. In this scenario, you have all the games and are prepared to loan your mom/wife/brother whichever system they need to play it on. You made sure to buy Oracle of Seasons and Ages on the 3DS Virtual Console before the eShop closed, and that foresight is maybe about to pay off. We're also only addressing the mainline single-player titles, so you fans of Link's Crossbow Training and Four Swords will just have to deal with it. As a quick disclaimer, no, I don't hate your favorite games, and yes, this is just my opinion. Let's start with the games that are easy to eliminate from contention, at least in my opinion. Coming in at number 1 is Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. This game is a hard pass for me. I understand it has its fans, and I'm genuinely happy for anyone who enjoys this title, but no. As an introduction to the series as a whole, I legitimately struggle to think of a worst possible starting point. This game is difficult, frustrating, and is the only side-scroller in the series, so it is also not representative of what to expect from the other titles. If your mom hates this game, she'll assume this is what Zelda is like and give the rest of the series a pass. If she loves it, she'll be disappointed when she sees the other games are nothing like it. This game is my personal low point for the series, and is also so unlike other games that it really makes for a poor starting point. While we're on the subject of games that are too different from the rest of the series, I have to add the DS titles to the list of easy no's. This may surprise some people, considering the touchscreen controls are arguably more accessible for your husband who's only ever played Mario Kart Wii and Nintendogs, but our goal is to introduce the series as a whole, and so we're looking for a more quintessential Zelda-y title. Of the two, I would offer someone Spirit Tracks before Phantom Hourglass, if only because they eliminated the backtracking of the game's central dungeon, but the touchscreen movement and combat makes these games a little too different from the other titles in the series for me to recommend them as a starter. Next up, and disappointing all of you purists who feel that release order is the only way to experience the series, I feel that it's very safe to eliminate the original title in the series from serious contention as our first game recommendation. Quite simply, while this game is a classic for a reason and is more playable than it was a decade ago, thanks to the Switch Online version having game rewind functionality as well as a version where you start the game fully upgraded, it really doesn't do anything that later games don't do better, and its age mechanics and difficult to find objectives make it a tough sell for someone who's not intensely passionate about playing things in order. I feel like our little brother isn't going to want to run around bombing random walls to find the next dungeon or secret, and he'd rather have something where it's a little more clear what to do next. For our next round of eliminations, we'll be focusing on games that could potentially make a fine entry point to the series, but are just overshadowed by another title. Remember, we're recommending these games to a complete newbie. I'm not saying the titles in this section are worse than their counterparts, just that they might be less playable for a newcomer to the series. This one pains me. I absolutely adore the tone and unique mechanics of Majora's Mask, but I think it's exactly those features that make it a tough sell as a starting point. It can be a little more difficult to appreciate the shift in tone if you haven't played other Zelda titles for comparison's sake, and the 3-day tunnel before the world ends can be incredibly frustrating if you don't know how to play around it properly. Personally, even though I like this game more than Ocarina of Time, I would never recommend that someone play it first, especially because it's a direct sequel. I think having played Ocarina is almost essential to enjoying this game to its fullest potential, and I also think that anyone with a low tolerance for frustration, like our imaginary recommendee has, would do well to look a few things up before playing this game. For example, knowing how to slow down time is hugely helpful in exploring and enjoying this game at your own pace, and if you happen to walk past a scarecrow because you're in a rush or you're not quite sure what you're looking for, and you miss learning about this ability, it can make the whole game feel a lot more rushed and frustrating the rest of the way through. Majora's Mask is a hugely rewarding game, but I think it demands a bit more from the player than I think we can ask of our first timer. Next up, we have our Game Boy and Game Boy Advance titles, and you might notice that the one I've left off this list right now is Link's Awakening. My reasoning for this is solely about age, and Link's Awakening is the one game from this era that has been remade, making it a good deal more playable to a series newcomer. I absolutely adore some of the features in these games. I think they're a ton of fun, but unfortunately, they're all a bit too old for us to get somebody started on. We're shooting for maximum playability in our recommendation, and the Link's Awakening remake would provide a substantially more hassle-free introduction to the series than Oracle of Seasons, Ages, or Minish Cap. As great as they are, they just wouldn't be as good of an entry point. With apologies to all you timeline order stands, I really don't think Skyward Sword is the ideal entry point for the series either. I do think that it ultimately has an important place in the series as a whole, especially going back to it now and seeing which ideas would be expanded on in Breath of the Wild, but unfortunately it falls too short in a few key areas to merit serious consideration. First, the controls. The original version on Wii U has way too much motion waggle to be seriously playable in 2023, and while the Switch remaster does fix some of the original's flaws, the directional combat was too central to the game's mechanics to be implemented without somewhat awkward controls, which makes this a bit less approachable than it might be otherwise. As a more classic 3D title, it falls short of its predecessor, Twilight Princess, and it also fails to live up to the exploration and freedom offered by Breath of the Wild. It exists as kind of an awkward middle stage between what Zelda was and what it currently is, and doesn't embody the series as a whole well enough to make perfect sense as a first title. Now this is where we really get into the idea of what Zelda you think is the best to start with versus which is the best, period. I'm not trying to say anything bad about this game, its impact, or its legacy. A Link to the Past gave us the core of what Zelda would become for a long time, and many of the ideas that first came up in this title have been series staples ever since. This game is, whatever your personal opinion of it may be, a true classic, and the entry we can thank the most for Zelda being what it is today. All that being said, I don't think it's the most approachable first choice for our imaginary brother/mom/wife. While it's true that many of the ideas that originated in this game would be used for decades, the reality is also that they have been refined and iterated on over those same decades to become more approachable and friendly. This is why I would definitely rather start someone off on A Link Between Worlds rather than A Link to the Past, simply because it retains so many of the elements that make A Link to the Past great, while also being more accessible as a first title. Oh boy, what to do with this one? Breath of the Wild single-handedly rejuvenated the series by moving in a bold new direction, providing fans with endless hours of stellar gameplay and exploration, becoming an instant classic in the process. It's considered by many to be the single best game of all time, let alone the best Zelda game. But is it a good starting place for someone looking to get into the series? I don't think so. A big part of the reason that this game is so fantastic is all the ways it departs from the series' roots, and that is also why it doesn't represent what the more classic experience of the Zelda franchise is like. Breath of the Wild is a fantastic game, make no mistake. It is excellent both on its own and as an evolution of the series. But after playing a game that offers so much freedom to its players, the more straightforward and linear nature of some earlier titles can almost seem restrictive in comparison. If you were to play only one Zelda game, I might just recommend this one. but if you plan on playing all of them, it really isn't where I would start. Now we get into the real heavy hitters, the true contenders for the coveted title of Best First Zelda Game, in Colin's opinion. We have 5 games remaining on our list, and I'll be going through the pros and cons of each before settling on a final verdict for the Zelda game that I would recommend my mother play first. Any of these would realistically be a fine choice, but for the purposes of this exercise, there can only be one. The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. Still lauded by many as the high watermark of the series, this is likely the title that leapt to many people's minds when they saw the title of this video. The game that brought the series into the third dimension is an all-time classic and introduced so many ideas that would become staples of the series moving forward. It has some excellent dungeons, one of the best stories in the series, and a very cool core gimmick of switching between young and old Link to travel through time as necessary. Where this entry loses points, however, is in the areas of presentation and gameplay. While playing the 3DS port alleviates some of the fiddliness of the game's inventory and map system, it still has some outdated design that can frustrate, such as the poor camera controls and some occasionally vague direction. A pioneering title in its own right, Ocarina of Time suffers only because it came before other titles that would have the opportunity, knowledge, and technology to sand down its few rough edges. For anyone with the patience to get past a little bit of dated game design, a wonderful introduction to the series can be found here. In my mind, Link's Awakening is kind of an odd duck. Anecdotally, I've never seen anybody bring this game up as being the best in the series or even their personal favorite, and I recall seeing sort of a collective shrug when this title was announced for a remake over something else earlier in the series, like A Link to the Past. However, this did get a remake, and the quality of it is fantastic. While it may not offer up some of the unique selling points or compelling gimmicks that other entries in the series do, the graphics are gorgeous and the gameplay has been updated to become smoother and more responsive, really in line with more modern titles. It may not necessarily be the best Zelda game there is, and it might not have pushed forward bold new designs in the way that other games have, but if you were to sit down with someone new to the series right now and hand them a Zelda game, this very well might be the one to choose. It doesn't have the name recognition or reputation of some of the other entries, but for being the most up-to-date and playable 2D Zelda title, it finds itself near the top of our list. My personal favorite entry in the series, Wind Waker has a lot going for it. Though somewhat maligned at the time of its release, the cartoony art style has aged exceptionally well, and the HD remaster added a few quality of life features that really make the experience shine. Most notably with the Swift Sail allowing you to sail at top speed through the world without having to stop and play a little song every time you want to change the wind direction. As I mentioned earlier though, to someone new to the gaming series, finding the sail is not the most intuitive task, and that coupled with the sheer amount of sailing necessary in the game can lead to a fair amount of frustration if you aren't prepared or down for it. The polarizing nature of the sailing could definitely turn off some potential fans, as some people understandably find it somewhat tedious, especially in the late game you have to sail around looking for Triforce shards. That being said, the combat is fairly intuitive and smooth, and the dungeons are a bit more on the accessible side. Some people, I've heard, use this as a point against the game, those series veterans who want more of a challenge, but to our newcomer they can provide just the right level of difficulty while avoiding frustration. There's a lot to love in Wind Waker, and it just might be the perfect game to introduce someone new to the series and leave them wanting more. As I mentioned in the previous section, I feel that A Link Between Worlds is almost everything that A Link to the Past was, but updated into a more modern package. It may not seem quite as original to people who've played all the other 2D titles before it, but this game is still an excellent entry in the series and benefits greatly from being released in this millennium. Although the rental system for gadgets can take away from the pacing of the game and result in a somewhat flat difficulty curve, the game is still an absolute joy to play from start to finish, and the ability to turn Link two-dimensional to solve puzzles and find secrets never stops being interesting or fun. I think our potential player would have a blast playing this game first, as it's a very welcoming entry that serves as a great introduction to all that Zelda has to offer. Twilight Princess, the edgy dark Zelda that launched on the Wii. This game brought the visuals and tone in a much more serious direction after the cartoony fun that was Wind Waker, and I think that for the most part it succeeded. Admittedly, Twilight Princess doesn't have the most challenging dungeons in the series, but as I've already pointed out, that's kind of a plus in recommending a game to your aunt. What this game does have is cool and fun to use gadgets, the ability to run around as a wolf version of Link, and Midna, who is the best Zelda companion in the series. Sorry, Navi. The HD version on Wii U is our version of choice here, as it looks great and does away with any Wii Remote waggling in combat. As a potential first entry to the series, I have trouble thinking of too many negatives with this title, because it's both approachable and an all-around solid game. It effectively blurs the line between the series' heritage and modern design sensibilities, making it an ideal starting point to move backwards or forwards through the franchise from. After much consideration and taking everything into account, I have to say the best Legend of Zelda game to recommend to a newbie is Triforce Heroes! Just kidding guys, it's Twilight Princess. Twilight Princess has everything about the series that I would want to showcase to a first-time player and is among the most accessible entries. Compared to other 3D games in the contenders category, it took the edge over Ocarina of Time simply for being newer and easier both to play and on the eyes. I couldn't pick Wind Waker even though it's my personal favorite because I was worried that our player might get turned off by all the sailing. To me, Twilight Princess just hits that sweet spot of accessibility and quality that would get our prospective fan hooked on the series with the least chance of them bouncing off. If you disagree, feel free to tell me exactly what I got wrong, but please be gentle. Thank you all so much for sticking with me all the way to the end of my very first YouTube video. I had an absolute blast making it and I really hope you enjoyed watching too. It means the world to me that anyone decided my video is worth spending their time on. My plan is to upload videos like this every other week, and if that interests you, maybe subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I've also started a Patreon, which I've linked in the description, and for now, I'm hoping to use it to fund some better equipment to improve the quality of future videos. If you don't want to pledge to a channel with only one video up, don't blame you. Please just keep watching for yourself, leave a like, and decide for yourself later on.